Shift Classroom 2 story time. Today's story is one of my favorite stories. It's called Flat Stanley. And this is a chapter book. So I'm going to read one chapter at a time so we really get to understand each chapter before moving on. And for the first chapter, what I want you to be able to answer at the end of the chapter is what happens to Flat Stanley. And the reason why I want you to remember that and to think about that is because you're going to get a special surprise in the mail. And I want you to have read this story so that you can go on adventures just like Flat Stanley. So here we go. Flat Stanley. Chapter 1, The Big Bulletin Board. Breakfast was ready. I will go wake the boys, Mrs. Lambchop said to her husband, George Lambchop. Just then, their younger son Arthur called from the bedroom he shared with his brother Stanley. Hey, come and look, hey! Uh-oh, wonder if something's happened to Stanley. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop were both very much in favor of politeness and careful speech. Hay is for horses, Arthur, not people, Mr. Lambchop said as they entered the bedroom. Try to remember that. Excuse me, Arthur said, but look! He pointed to Stanley's bed. Across it lay the enormous bulletin board that Mr. Lambchop had given the boys a Christmas ago so that they could pin up pictures and messages and maps. It had fallen during the night on top of Stanley, but Stanley was not hurt. In fact, he would still have been sleeping if he had not been woken up by his brother's shout. What's going on here? He called out cheerfully from beneath the enormous board. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop hurried to lift it from the bed. Heavens, said Mrs. Lambchop. Gosh, said Arthur, Stanley's flat. As a pancake, said Mr. Lambchop. Darnest thing I've ever seen. Let's all have breakfast, Mrs. Lambchop said. Then Stanley and I will go see Dr. Dan and hear what he has to say. In his office, Dr. Dan examined Stanley all over. How do you feel? He asked. Does it hurt very much? I felt sort of tickly for a while after I got up, Stanley Lambchop said, but I feel fine now. Well, that's mostly how it is with these cases, said Dr. Dan. Well, just have to keep an eye on this young fella, he said when he had finished the examination. Sometimes we doctors, despite all our years of training and experience, can only marvel at how little we really know. Mrs. Lambchop said she thought Stanley's clothes would have to be altered by the tailor now, so Dr. Dan told his nurse to take Stanley's measurements. Mrs. Lambchop wrote them down. Stanley was 4 feet tall, about a foot wide, and half an inch thick. Wow, this is a great story. Wonder what's going to happen in chapter 2. But right now, remember, I want you to think about what happened to poor Stanley. And why did that happen? So good luck figuring it out until chapter 2.